He had everything money could buy but was desperate for the one thing it couldn't: my heart. I never imagined a man worth billions would be sending me flowers daily, writing heartfelt letters, and practically on his knees begging for my attention. Here's what happened. You know those stories where someone's life takes such an unexpected turn that you'd swear it was made up? Yeah, this is one of those. I still wake up some mornings and have to remind myself that yes, one of the world's wealthiest men, a literal billionaire with companies across 3 continents, spent months pursuing me like I was the last glass of water in a desert. Not his money, not his connections, not his empire. He wanted me, just me. I'm Amara. Born and raised in Detroit by a single mum who worked 2 jobs so I could be the first in our family to go to college. Now I run my own small but growing graphic design business. Nothing particularly extraordinary about my life. I rent a modest apartment, struggle with my student loans like everyone else, and have a tight circle of ride-or-die friends who keep me grounded. What I value most? Authenticity, honesty, and people who see me for who I really am, not what I can do for them. That's probably why his attention caught me so off guard. When you've spent your whole life being overlooked or underestimated because you're a black woman in spaces not designed for you, having someone with that much power and privilege become absolutely transfixed by you is disorienting, flattering, sure, but also terrifying. Because power changes everything, doesn't it? Before I tell you what happened, I need you to stay with me until the end. This isn't just about romance or wealth. It's about how I handled a powerful man's persistent advances and the completely unexpected life lessons that turned everything I thought I knew about relationships, worth, and myself upside down. Trust me, the ending is nothing like what you're imagining right now. I never expected to meet someone like him at my friend Desiree's art gallery opening. It was a small event in a renovated warehouse downtown. Nothing fancy, just local artists and a cash bar with cheap wine. I was there to support Des and showcase some of my graphic design work that she'd incorporated into her latest installation. The moment he walked in, the entire energy of the room shifted. You could practically feel people's posture straightening, conversations hushing. Not because he made a grand entrance, quite the opposite. He was dressed simply in a navy blue button-down and slacks, but there was something about the way he carried himself, confident but not cocky, present but not demanding attention. I remember thinking he looked out of place, yet somehow perfectly at ease. I didn't know who he was then. I was too busy helping Des with a lighting issue when he approached my corner of the gallery. He stood in front of my digital art piece for what felt like forever, just absorbing it, not looking at his phone, not scanning the room for someone more important to talk to, just genuinely present with the work. You created this. His voice was softer than I expected, almost hesitant. Yes, I replied, automatically bracing myself for the usual backhanded compliment I often get as a black female artist. "You're talented for a..." comments. Instead, he asked me about my process, the symbolism behind certain elements, real questions that showed he'd actually engaged with the piece. We talked for maybe 15 minutes before Des finally whispered in my ear who he actually was. I nearly choked on my wine. Marcus Harrington, tech innovator turned clean energy investor worth billions. The man whose companies I'd read case studies about in business school. The philanthropist whose foundation was reshaping education in underserved communities. And here he was, asking about my inspiration as if I was the important one in the room. When he asked for my business card, I assumed it was a polite gesture. Something successful people do before forgetting you exist. I couldn't have been more wrong. 3 days after the gallery opening, a delivery arrived at my small studio office. Not flowers or chocolates, those would come later, but a custom leather portfolio with Amara designs embossed in gold. Inside was a handwritten note. "Your art tells stories that words cannot." I'd like to hear more of those stories, perhaps over dinner. Marcus. His personal number was scrawled at the bottom. I called Desiree immediately. This has to be some kind of joke, right? I paced around my desk, staring at the portfolio like it might explode. Des laughed and told me to call him. I didn't. Not for a week. Something about it felt overwhelming. Not just him, but what he represented. A world I'd never been invited into. When another gift arrived, a rare art book I'd mentioned loving during our brief conversation, I finally texted him. One dinner, I told myself. One dinner to satisfy my curiosity and then back to real life. That dinner turned into 3 more that week. Each time, he showed up without entourage or fanfare. Just a man eager to hear my thoughts on everything from social justice to sci-fi movies. He remembered details about conversations that even my closest friends would have forgotten. It was disarming. "Girl, he's sprung," my sister Tasha declared when I showed her the daily texts he sent. "A billionaire is literally begging for your attention." My mom was more cautious. "Men with that much power are used to getting what they want," she warned during our weekly call. "Just make sure you know what you're getting into." I wondered that myself, especially when paparazzi caught us leaving a restaurant and suddenly, my social media exploded. Comments ranged from supportive to vicious. Gold digger, trophy, he'll get bored. Each one stung, even as Marcus's pursuit intensified. Surprise visits to my office, having my favorite meals delivered during late work nights, calling just to hear about my day. Part of me was falling for his genuine interest. Another part couldn't stop wondering, what does a man who can have anything see in someone like me? The first time Marcus invited me to a charity gala, I spent 3 hours getting ready, only to arrive and feel like I had a neon sign above my head flashing, "Doesn't belong." Women in designer gowns gave me once-overs that could cut glass. Men spoke around me, not to me, their eyes constantly scanning the room for someone more important. One woman actually asked if I was staff while I was standing next to Marcus. "They'll adjust," Marcus whispered, squeezing my hand. But I wasn't sure I would. His world operated by unspoken rules I'd never learned, with prejudices masked behind polite smiles and air kisses. The cultural gap between us felt like a canyon, him raised with private schools and European summers, me with public education and summer jobs at the mall. "Your background makes you authentic," he told me one night as we debated whether I should accompany him to a business summit in Tokyo. "That's what I love about you." Love. The word hung between us like a question mark, because despite our growing connection, I couldn't ignore how different our realities were. When racial tensions erupted in my community after a police shooting, his well-meaning but detached response reminded me of our different perspectives. When I spoke passionately about issues affecting everyday people, his board members exchanged glances that screamed phase. His ex-wife didn't help matters. A socialite from a wealthy family, she made sure to comment publicly about Marcus's interesting choice in dating me. The tabloids had a field day, speculating whether I was after his money or he was having some midlife crisis. "Why me?" I finally asked him one night, after a particularly brutal society event. "You could literally be with anyone." He looked genuinely confused. "That's exactly why I choose you, because in a world where everything feels transactional, you're the only person who sees me, not what I can provide." But could I truly believe that? Or was I just another acquisition, different, exotic, a challenge? Everything changed the night of Marcus's company's anniversary gala. We'd been dating for 4 months. 4 months of me constantly feeling like I was auditioning for a role I never asked for. That night, surrounded by tech elites and investors, Marcus was scheduled to give the keynote speech about his vision for the future. 10 minutes before he was supposed to go on stage, I found him alone in a side room, staring out the window, his hands trembling slightly. The confident billionaire was nowhere to be seen. Instead, there stood a man looking utterly lost. "My father should be here," he said quietly when I approached. I knew his father had passed away 2 years ago, but this was the first time he'd spoken about it with raw emotion. He built this company from nothing. I was just the kid with the fancy degree who took it public. As his carefully constructed facade crumbled, Marcus revealed the truth. His relentless drive wasn't ambition but fear. Fear of not measuring up to his immigrant father's legacy. Fear that without constant achievement, he was nothing. Fear that everyone, including me, only saw his wealth, never his worth. The night we met, he confessed, I went to that gallery because my therapist suggested I find something that made me feel human again. Your art was the first thing in years that made me forget about being Marcus Harrington. In that moment, our power dynamic shifted. I wasn't the one who didn't belong in his world. He was the one desperate to escape it. His pursuit of me wasn't about conquest or novelty. It was about finding someone who hadn't been corrupted by the very wealth that had imprisoned him. You don't need to give the speech, I told him, taking his hands. You don't need to be anything tonight. For the first time, I saw him, truly saw him, not as a billionaire, but as a human being carrying wounds money couldn't heal. After that night, our relationship transformed into something neither of us expected. I stopped trying to fit into his world, and he stopped trying to escape into mine. Instead, we created our own space between these worlds, one where both of us could be vulnerable, authentic, and growing. The greatest lesson came 3 months later when Marcus asked me to collaborate on redesigning his foundation's approach to community investment. At first, I thought it was just his way of including me in his life, but as we worked together, combining my grassroots perspective with his resources, I realized he genuinely valued my insight, not as his girlfriend, but as a Black woman who understood communities his boardroom never could. You've changed how I see wealth, he told me one evening as we walked through my old neighborhood. I used to think money could solve everything. Now I understand it's relationships that actually create change. Meanwhile, I was unlearning my own prejudices about wealth and privilege. I'd assumed people like Marcus were shallow, detached from reality. Some are, but I discovered that power can be as much a prison as poverty, just with nicer furniture. His vulnerability showed me that judgment flows both ways, and assumptions about others, regardless of their status, limit our capacity for connection. The woman who once felt intimidated in high society gatherings now speaks confidently in boardrooms, challenging billion-dollar decisions from a perspective they desperately need. The man who once threw money at problems now sits quietly in community centers, learning to listen before acting. Our unlikely connection taught me that true power isn't in wealth or status, but in the courage to be seen, fully, flaws and all. In a world obsessed with appearances, nothing is more revolutionary than authenticity. This journey showed me that my value was never about fitting into someone else's world. It was about creating a better one through the strength of being unapologetically myself. So, where are we now? Marcus and I have been together for 2 years. We don't live in his mansion. Instead, we split our time between my apartment and a modest house we bought together in my old neighborhood, where we're helping launch a youth arts program. His billions remain mostly untouched in foundations focused on community-led development. My design business has grown, but I still take on small clients who can't afford premium rates. Our relationship isn't perfect. We still navigate cultural differences, public scrutiny, and occasional misunderstandings. But it's real. And that reality taught me the most valuable lesson. Never shrink yourself to fit someone else's expectation. Whether they have billions or nothing at all, your perspective, your experience, your voice, that's the true currency in a world desperate for authenticity. I never imagined a billionaire would beg for my love. But now I understand it wasn't about his wealth or my uniqueness. It was about 2 people brave enough to see each other beyond the labels society placed on us. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. Know your worth, stand in your truth, And the right people will not just see you, they'll move heaven and earth to keep you in their life.